Hello, everyone. Let's continue. Okay. Okay. So, okay. All right. So any questions so far? Any questions so far?
We did have two questions, Venerable Robina. I think
related to the topic or just additional things?
I think from what we were talking about yesterday. So I wonder if there's anyone that had.
Okay, that's fine. No, never mind. Just ask the question. Let's see. Ask the question.
Sure. The first question was from Julie, and it just says, can people reach out to you in their in your dreams?
Okay, dream mind. If we take the Vajrayana model, the dream mind, we've got, okay, take the Vajrayana model of the person. We've got gross consciousness, which is sensory and the way we function in day-to-day life. And that's a very limited level of cognition. We can see that, you know, we see things, we hear things, we touch things. We're mainly involved in the sensory world. So, and then as soon as we have any kind of connection with people, kind of intuition, a sense of feeling a sensitivity towards people, already we're moving beyond the gross towards, if you like, towards our more subtle consciousness. So that really manifests our subtle consciousness in ordinary people. That manifests when we go to sleep, and then we have dreams. We know dreams are this weird world, aren't they? But that's your subtle consciousness. So many people have clairvoyant experiences in their dreams. Many people have very unusual experiences because our subtle mind is capable of that. So the great yogis and holy beings, they don't need to go to sleep. They don't need to have their dreams in order to access their subtle consciousness, because they've cultivated single-pointed concentration, because they know how to access their subtle mind. They've got already, one of the qualities is clairvoyance. They can see the past, they see the future, they see the minds of others. They've got incredible power, and we can accomplish that. That's your subtle mind. You've accessed your subtle mind. So if another person, you know, it's a possibility that two people with their more subtle mind can connect with each other in using your dreams. You can do that, yes. But I mean, there's no big deal. So what? So who cares? It's just being clever. So the real reason to access your subtle mind by meditating is so that you can help sentient beings, you know, so you can really have the power, the wisdom to see mostly how to benefit them. That means you've got to go so deeply into their mind, into their past and future. Of course, that sounds so mystical in our culture, but that's exactly what we need to accomplish to really be of benefit to sentient beings, to really know how to help them. So yes, in theory, these things are possible, and it's your subtle mind. And then we've got very subtle consciousness, which is the subtlest level of our being when we're most sophisticated in our practice, you know. Yes. Doris has a point as well.
Yeah, another question from Dale. If Buddha nature is in all sentient beings and is beyond space and time and is not inherently existent as and of itself, then essentially we are already Buddhas in ourselves. So why can't we just tap into that and be it instantaneously? Does our mind create conceptual time?
Okay, it's a good point, but I would suggest it's not quite a right viewpoint. It's not quite logical. Let me explain. So first of all, Buddha nature is this kind of, you know, it's an odd phrase. We've implied it already, but we haven't said this word, so let's look at it. Buddha nature, as that person correctly said, we all possess Buddha nature. Every single consciousness, Buddha said, he has found that every mind necessarily possesses the potential to be fully enlightened. We possess the potential to be free of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness. Buddha, we have that potential. So one of the misconceptions, I would suggest, which is indicated by what you just said, if you've all got Buddha nature, to suggest that we're all Buddha now, that's a misconception. Let me use a simple example. So Buddha nature just means potential. So when you see, you know, we could argue, we could say, using this Buddhist phrase, this idea of nature, we could say that all acorns possess oak tree nature. So what that means is that if, you know, we know from botany, and, you know, that little shaped thing, if you put it in the ground, give it lots of time and water and space and sunshine, it will eventually manifest as an oak tree. And it's a really good, simple analogy. So by definition, what an acorn is a potential oak tree. But to say because every acorn possesses oak tree nature, to think that it's already an oak tree and why can't the acorn tap into its true nature is clearly nonsense. Try and get shade from an acorn. You will be very disappointed, Dale. You get my point here. So there's many teachings in Buddhism actually do talk about, say the Nyingmapas very much talk about how we already are Buddha. But I mean, technically it's not true. Technically, like the acorn, but I think the point is because with ego, we're so caught up in our misery and we're so caught up in identifying with our nonsense and so caught up in believing I'm nobody and I'm nothing. It's very encouraging to think I'm already a Buddha. I just have to tap into it. But the Buddha, certainly the lamas that I have, the Gelugpa tradition would never talk that way. And I think the acorn's a good example. But it's so tasty. If you only ever see acorns and you just think it's like breakfast, like the squirrel does, and then you suddenly realize there's this amazing thing that you just have to give it space and time and you can turn into that magnificent tree, that's quite encouraging. It doesn't look like an acorn. You never can see by observing an acorn. If you look at an acorn for 1,000 years, it'll never reveal itself to you as a potential oak tree. But when you know it, you begin to treat it differently. That's the good view to know we've all got this potential, which implies both emptiness and impermanence. But this is a very powerful one for us to apply because we really do in this our materialist world with great respect. When we talk about a person, our view is a normal person has some anger, some love, some jealousy, some fear, some depression, some kindness, some intelligence. We hope we have more of the so-called good than the bad, but there's no view that would suggest that you can utterly rid yourself of all the rubbish. We can't even imagine what a person would be like. That sounds like hilarious to us. It's very hard for us to imagine this. So to hear that that is our potential, and every one of us possesses just by being a mind possessor, our true nature is to be a Buddha. So that's pretty tasty, pretty delicious. But you've got to give it the conditions. You've got to ripen that condition, Dale. You've got to ripen that potential by practicing virtue, by stopping harming, by being virtuous, by doing lots of purification, by doing lots of practice, by realizing emptiness, by practicing bodhicitta. They're the conditions that will ripen your Buddha nature with certainty. But that's the hard work we have to do. Does that make sense, Dale? Good. I'm very happy. Good question. Thank you. Doris had a question as well. What was Doris's question?
Yes, Doris just asks, could Venerable Robina tell everyone about the 24-hour Saturday sessions starting tomorrow?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Doris. It was very interesting. You know, we last week, I think it was, wasn't it? I forget now. Some of you might know about it. Some people came up with the idea, the Sangha, our monks and nuns, we do a 24-hour heart sutrathon. So, you know, for 1 hour, each of us, the 24 monks or nuns led the session for 1 hour, and I did one of those. And then another 24 monks and nuns were facilitating it. And, you know, and so we all counted our mantras, and those mantras of the collection around the world for 24 hours was then offered to Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa. So just recently, Venerable Joan, because Lama Zopa's captured in Kopan, they're so happy to have him. I think they haven't had him there for more than 35 years. They haven't had him for so long. He's been there since December, you know, it's incredible. They're so excited. So he's doing all these millions of things. And someone else asked me recently on Facebook as well, so I'll answer it here. But they do all these thousands of fire pujas. I don't know if you saw the photos, but all these lamas are stuck in Nepal now instead of being around the world. And they've all got together, particularly energized, I think, by this amazing female lama, Khandra Lama, one of Rinpoche's students, but also one of Rinpoche's lamas. He said, remember Jason in the November course, and Amy, Rinpoche said, oh, she's my first lady guru, he said. But they're kind of each other's guru. They both bow to each other. They're wonderful. So she's the one who came up with all these, because she's a pretty brilliant lama. She's the one who came up with all these amazing pujas. And there's this photo of all these lamas lining up doing their fire pujas, kind of trying to destroy all the obstacles and trying to help them shift some energy in this world because of the suffering. So when Venerable Joan told Rinpoche about all these heart sutras, Rinpoche was so happy. And then he said, well, you know what? I think the Sangha now had better do another thing. And there's this particular prayer. We can post it here or something. I think you can give it to people. It's just a short prayer. They don't say what century it was written in, by some lama called, what's his name? Something I forgot. What's his name? I forget. Anyway, you'll see it on the Facebook. We'll see it in the thing. He wrote this prayer, very short prayer, and it was to help dispel this epidemic that was going to destroy this one Sakya place, this Sakya monastery or something. And all the other things hadn't worked, but by saying this prayer and combining it with lots of Om Mani Padme Hum, lots of Chenrezig mantra, it was able to cure the epidemic. So Lama Zopa, I think, first got us to do this prayer back in 2011, after September 11, I think. It's very short, several verses. So he recommends, so that monks, we're just starting it tomorrow because we're trying to do Rinpoche's wishes. He just told us a couple of days ago. So I've signed up for the 7 o'clock Santa Fe time slot, which is I think 11 p.m. in Sydney. I've just on my Facebook entry, someone just put it up there now. We've got the time slot. So I'm going to, and I've agreed. And Rinpoche said we should just do it for the next Saturdays, no matter how many Saturdays. God knows, we could do it for the next 10 years. Who knows? So I booked up for 7 a.m. Santa Fe time, 11 p.m. Sydney time. For the one I'm going to do 1 hour. So we'll do a bit of mantras, lots of mantras. We'll do a meditation on compassion, a guided visualization meditation, and we'll recite that prayer. So you can join for 10 minutes, for 5 minutes, whatever you like. But it's just starting tomorrow. So, I mean, in the land of monastery, pardon?
What? So it's starting right now, actually, Venerable Robina. It's on YouTube right now.
Oh, yeah, right now, because that's right. It began 5:30 p.m., a quarter of an hour ago. It began.
That's right. So they're on YouTube now. Yep.
Okay, so that's, yeah, right.
Yep.
It's on YouTube or on Zoom? It's on YouTube, not Zoom.
On YouTube with the Chenrezig Institute channel. So they've I've just now they're on there right now. So
okay, that's good. I didn't put on my Facebook page. I only put the Zoom connection, so people can use that. But if you can tell me if you can connect me to the Chenrezig YouTube one, I can also add that to my Facebook page as well.
Yes, so people can't use the Zoom. Only those that are partaking in the prayers have access to the Zoom. That we're doing. No.
Whoever, I put the Zoom link on my Facebook page. Whoever wants to do Zoom can do it. But
okay,
YouTube is probably easier. If you can let me, you can email me. Can you? That YouTube link.
Yes, I can do that. Yep.
I can add that to my Facebook page. Okay, great. That's what we do.
Thank you.
And you can join for 5 minutes, for half an hour, whatever. And it's 24 hours starting 5:30 a.m. Sydney time for the foreseeable future every Saturday. So how interesting. We'll see if we can help change the world and help heal the sickness. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, darling. That's wonderful. So thank you, Doris. Thank you very much.
And so Amy put a couple of links into the chat here as well so people can access that information.
Great. Very good. Well, I better change it on my YouTube, on my Facebook page. I better send it to somebody. Okay, because he's in New York, so I better grab him before he goes to bed. Okay, thank you for that. That's very helpful. Okay, so that's it for questions.
We did have one more from Maria. She had a story she wanted to share about following Lama Zopa's advice for the dying.
Okay, good, Maria. Tell us. Maria, where are you?
I had a friend of mine contact me this week that her stepmother was dying, and on Thursday I sent her, hold on, I've got to find the email now. Okay, so on Thursday I sent her Lama Zopa's advice for the dying, and Di and I have been speaking this week, and she said, I think it's soon. And her stepmother, Judy, was very scared, very angry, wouldn't talk to anyone, hitting people and, suffering from dementia. So on Thursday, I sent her Lama Zopa's advice for the dying. So yesterday, Di sat with her and she held Judy's hand in one hand and read from her phone Lama Zopa's advice. And this was the email that she sent me this morning. She said, well, I have had a productive past couple of hours. I woke up at 3:30 a.m., tossed and turned. About 4 a.m.-ish, I had a sense Judy was leaving and doing her final tidy up business. We had a conversation. I continued to encourage her to move on to what's next in store for her. She said, I'm sorry. I knew that was about her part in our relationship. I easily said I forgive her. While our voices were loud enough, it had the quality of an ethereal whisper. can't explain it any better. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I finally got up at 5-ish. I just put the kettle on, and of course you can guess it was my mobile rang. The night RN nurse said she died about 30 minutes before, not long after checking on her, knowing her time was near. I sensed she was not hanging around and having farewelled her from here. We had a pretty intense 2 hours yesterday while I was sitting with her. She was in and out of consciousness, but responding to me when I talked to her. Significantly was your part, dear Maria, yesterday's Buddhist reading, which I did while I was sitting with her. She faced me all the time, and for the first time I was holding her hand with one of mine and mobile in the other. What struck me most in the reading was the concept of making it a joyful experience. I read and read and read and passed on what I felt was important snippets to her as they arose. It was a missing link, and I found myself with joy saying to her this morning, woohoo, you did it. You've let your body go, and now on to the next adventure. So thank you goes to you. Thank you for your guidance. It was magical. And so it's done, and she's finally taken that all-important step. And now for my steps to finish her earthly existence. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful, Maria. Thank you so much for that. That's the power. This is the power of prayer, actually. That's the point, you know. One of the questions from people is how does prayer help? So, I mean, many stories like this really can, you know, or even just singing a mantra to somebody, Maria. So thank you for that. That's very kind.
So I'd like to offer at the end some prayers for Judy.
We can do that. We can dedicate at the end. We'll do that for everybody as well. We'll do that, Maria. Thank you. Very kind. Wonderful. Okay, more questions there? No, that's it. Can't hear you.
Sorry, that's it for the moment in the chat.
All right, let's continue then. Great, thank you. Okay, so this mind, this mind of ours, not physical, beginningless and endless, every millisecond, it kind of exists within this law of karma. It's not as if so much the law is a thing that does something to your mind. It's that your mind just naturally is playing out within the law of karma. Whatever grows in a garden is simply, you know, it can be articulated and described with the law of botany. The same with our mind. So as I said, with the Four Noble Truths. So let's look at the simple level of suffering and happiness in this life. Forget the bigger one of all the different realms of existence, because we can really get this, and if we can understand how to interpret these experiences of suffering in the way Buddha identifies them, when we really can get on track with what he's saying. So the first level of suffering is easy enough to understand, which is when the bad things happen. So then even if we forget lower realms, but if we think of being sick, people harming us, bad things happening, being tortured, being poor, losing your house, husband leaving you, whatever you like, think of your life. You know, if you think about it in general, in your life, since you can remember, since you were born, since you can remember, you can very happily, I think, divide all your feelings, like we said before, in the third category of states of mind, in Buddhist model of the mind, in which you've got the negative ones, the neurotic ones, the virtuous ones, and these mechanics of the mind. One of those is called feeling. Not the meaning we mean as an emotion. It's simply, we only have three kinds of those. Think about this and we can really prove it's true. We have moments of pleasant feelings, another word for happiness. We have moments of unpleasant feelings, another word for suffering. And we have, if you like, neutral. So forget again the neutral feelings, forget those. So we look into our life, since we can remember, if we start to track our experiences, we could divide them into those that are pleasant and happy and those that are suffering. It's pretty straightforward. And this is the very obvious, evident level, the straightforward, evident level of unhappy experiences and happy ones. So very simply, Buddha's saying at this first level of karma, this first understanding of karma that we learn in the first level of practice in junior school, Buddha exhorts us to refrain from doing actions that would ripen as the future unhappy experiences. So forget the lower realms even, forget that one. But we can see in this life, we don't want to be killed. We don't want to die. We don't want to be lied to. We don't want to be not believed. We don't want to be stolen from. We don't want to be homeless. We don't want to be sick. It's kind of really obvious. It kind of goes without saying, you know. So Buddha's saying, hey guys, I've found the causes of these experiences. So given that your mind will continue, you're going to continue to have experiences, because everything, every second of the day is your experiences. Every second you're experiencing either happiness or suffering, let's face it. So we know we don't want the suffering ones. He said, well, good, I'm glad you don't want them, because here's my method that I have found to stop those suffering experiences. So even just at the simplest level, he says, by living, by not killing, by not stealing, by not lying, by not abusing, by not cheating, by not harming us with our body and speech, ticking off 7 little things. They are the methods, he says, to stop the suffering experiences. So in other words, the third kind of suffering is called the experiences similar to the cause, which is how we're seen and treated by others. So even if you're just content to think, you know, in a human life, and if your karma is strong enough, you'll even start to see the experiences of it in this life. But even if you take the view that even in this life, to improve your lot, not to mention future life, you know, you're going to get a human body, and you want to have happy experiences. And this is still relative level, ordinary, simple level. Everybody wants that. That's what we spend our lives trying to do, to get happy experiences. We spend our lives trying to avoid suffering experiences. It's completely instinctively natural. Of course, it's based on attachment and aversion, but even within this simple framework of ordinary suffering and ordinary happiness, we know what we want and we know what we don't want. Well, Buddha says, I've found the method. I've found the causes. So, of course, in the beginning, you can't possibly prove it, but you've got to take it. He's a doctor. You know, you don't have to go and study medicine to prove your doctor's right. You just take the medicine and you soon might even see the results. So, you know, he's saying, if you subdue your body and speech, if you stop killing and lying and stealing and harming, guess what? Even if you get future results, you'll subdue your mind right now. Your mind will become more fulfilled and more content. And if you stop harming others right now, guess what? People will adore you. You'll be a gorgeous person to be around. But it's the long term he's looking at, of course. So that's a simple level, and that's at the level we function at the first level of practice. Of course, he adds in the really big picture there. You're only born in the lower realms, which is pretty abstract for us, and that's the major result that you will get from harming others. But you'll also get the residual results of harming others, of being killed, lied to, stolen from, etc., getting sick and so on. We know we don't want those. So that's Buddha's analysis. Now, let's look more deeply, when we look into the Four Noble Truths, let's look more deeply at this more nuanced level of suffering, which in reality is what we call happiness. And this is initially quite depressing. And we don't understand it initially, so we have to analyze it carefully. I've got to give you the Buddhist analysis of it. We've got to think about this when we begin to understand what he means by this second, more subtle level of suffering. It's quite hard to hear it. So in other words, again, in our life, we divide simply into happy experiences and into suffering experiences. And so okay, the first of the Four Noble Truths is there is suffering. And he lists 3 levels. The first is the suffering of suffering. So speaking simply within this life, that refers to the experiences similar to the cause of having harmed others in the past, where you get killed, get lied to, get stolen from, get not believed, don't have money, get sick, etc. Look at your life. They're the result of you doing actions like that. To those people, karma's pretty personal. So if you know you don't want those, you start applying the first level of practice. Back off and don't harm sentient beings. Now let's look at the second kind of suffering, the more nuanced one. And that's the problem. What Buddha calls the suffering of change is what we refer to as happiness. So another way of putting this, if we now look at the second noble truth, which is the causes of suffering, and we've stated this, but not in this framework, there are 2 main causes of one's suffering. We can extrapolate and say there are 2 main causes of happiness, exactly the same, no different. So let's look at the happiness ones, because it's nice to feel about the happiness. We always think of karma as being the bad things, you know. So there are millions of causes. If we take the law of cause and effect in the world as we know it, just to get a rose, you're going to have many causes and conditions to come together to produce a rose. But we can divide it into the main causes and the secondary causes. Well, we all know the main cause of a rose is a rose seed. Then the secondary causes, without which you won't get a rose, are the water, the soil, the sunshine, and a bit of time. It's pretty clear, we know that. But the main one is crucial, isn't it? Well, in terms of our suffering, as far as Buddha is concerned, the two main causes of our suffering and the two main causes of our moments of happiness are not as we think, and this is where it's shocking for us. As far as I'm concerned, Jason is the main cause of my happiness when he's kind to me. You know, Amy's the main cause of my suffering when she's mean to me. As far as we're concerned, there's one cause, and it's the event, the food, the person, the weather, the thing that your mummy did 47 years ago. That's how we think. That's roughly, crudely, our analysis. So naturally, we spend our time trying to remove those causes or trying to get out of the way of those causes. That's how we are. We get this. It's logical. But it's more nuanced than that for the Buddha. He says, yes, Jason's kindness is definitely a catalyst for my happiness. You can't argue. But it's absolutely not the principal cause, the main cause. Because the main cause of something has to be in the same character as the experience. So if the experience and happiness and suffering, remember, are experiences of our mind. They can also be sensory. But it's an experience, it's not the event. We're so dualistic. We're so caught up in believing the external event, person, thing is the happiness and the suffering and the cause of it. So when I think of my moment of happiness, I visualize Jason smiling at me and giving me, you know, the bunch of roses. When I think of the suffering I'm experiencing, I visualize Amy saying those mean words. We really believe they are the main causes. That's what we think about. That's what appears in our mind. And we just feel that whatever the feeling is in my mind is this kind of natural response to Amy's bad action, or this feeling of happiness is a natural response to Jason's pleasant action. That's not the right analysis, Buddha says. It's not subtle. It's not precise enough. It's not accurate enough. It's not nuanced enough. So the moment of happiness that I experience in my mind is merely triggered by Jason's kind action. That's called, for me, an experience similar to the cause of a past action I did in a few lifetimes ago, whatever, that left a seed in my mind that is now ripening upon contact with the external object called Jason and his action. But the happiness is in my mind and the cause is in my mind. It can't be anywhere else. The main cause has to come from my mind. The seed I planted when I did a good action similar to that 2.5 lives ago. The seed was in my mind. It was there latent, but it's multiplying and growing. Then the karma ripens. I meet the person called Jason. He gives me the bunch of roses. He smiles at me. And then it triggers the seed that was in my mind that I planted by my past virtue, which will now trigger and be ripening as my moment of happiness. That's the Buddha's analysis. So we have to learn to pay attention to the mind. It's really evident. But we are obsessed with the external. Obsessed. That's all we see. It's kind of fascinating. So the two main causes of my happiness, one is the past action, karma. The action I did 2.5 lives ago that left a seed in my mind that I didn't pull out yet, that is now finally being triggered 2.5 lives later. But that seed was planted. Karma is the first one. And the second cause, the main cause, is the virtuous state of mind I had, let's say compassion or generosity back then, that caused me to do that action of being kind to Jason. So there are two main causes of happiness, karma and a virtuous state of mind. Back then, they were already done 2.5 lives ago. And I meet Jason now, and just this random person, and he gives me this bunch of roses and smiles at me. So that is the event that is a secondary cause, merely a catalyst, which triggers the seed in my mind that was planted a long time ago from my action, triggered by my virtue, and now it ripens as the fruit of a moment of happiness. That's the way Buddha describes. So every second of our experiences of happiness since we were born, since we were conceived, are like that. As many moments of happiness that you can count is as many seeds of your past virtue that have been triggered. And exactly the same for suffering. You count as many moments of suffering that you've had in this life. Sickness. Terrible things happen to us. Terrible things happen to us. There is no doubt that people are treated terribly in this life by others. Every one of those seconds of suffering are in the mind, including experiencing in the body, because the sensory consciousness affects the body. Every one of those experiences of suffering is the result of a negative action I did to that person. Karma's pretty personal, triggered by a delusion that I didn't pull out. So every second of suffering, whether it's simply having a cold breeze on a cold day, all the way to being tortured, raped, murdered, harmed, cut into pieces, imprisoned for 40 years for doing nothing wrong. Whatever that experience of suffering, whatever that event is, that is what you think is the main cause of your suffering, is merely the catalyst for the seeds you planted in the past by doing actions like that. So it's this view, and this is the point, it's got nothing to do with reward, it's got nothing to do with punishment, but that's the dualistic view we have. We impose that view onto our experiences. But the Buddha has no concept like that. There is no punisher, there is no rewarder. So this is the explanation of suffering and happiness. How we can miss out on that if we think we want to be a Buddhist is like a joke. We're missing the point. This is karma. So at least the first level, we don't get into too much detail. We just stop doing negative actions. At least we stop sowing more negative seeds that will ripen as future suffering. And then we start to purify and put atomic bombs under those negative seeds to give a bit of space in our mental garden so we can begin to practice some virtue and begin to get some peace of mind. Now we go to high school and we start to go more deeply, given that we've got some discipline over our body and speech. We've got some space in our mind. Now we start to study Buddha's model of the mind and Buddha's technology about what is happiness, what is suffering, and what are its causes. It's really precise and detailed and demands we've got to squeeze our brains to learn it properly because it's absolutely opposite of what we think. So this is why the view of karma is so profound. Beginning to understand it and to learn to take responsibility for every millisecond of our experiences is incredible practice, unbelievable, and a transformation of our lives. Absolutely. And that's why we have to learn some details. It's not enough to say, oh, it's karma. It's like saying, tell me about how roses grow. Oh, it's botany. Yeah, I know that. Tell me about it. Oh, I don't know the details. What good is that? So if we don't even understand these 4 ways that karma ripens, which is a really powerful way to describe every single tiny event of your life. The 4, 1, your humanity is a fruit of virtue. 2, your tendencies. You've got to learn to distinguish the rubbish ones from the good ones. 3, your experiences. 4, even the environment. Every millisecond of how the environment impacts upon you, the main cause, your past actions. Every millisecond of how people see and treat you, what happens to you, the main cause is your past actions. Every millisecond of what's in your mind, the main cause is your past actions. And your own humanity is the main cause, is your past actions. We are our own creator, as His Holiness puts it. It's not a joke. It's a profound view. It's unbelievable. And this is the basis we learn from junior school. And this pervades our practice and gets deeper and deeper and deeper and more amazing and more subtle and more nuanced and more complete as we progress in our practice. You can never give this one up. It's the fundamental view of the universe, So it's quite profound to learn it and apply it. And this itself, before you even begin to know your mind, just by abiding by the laws of karma, it already transforms you. You become less attached, less neurotic, less extreme, less up and down, less self-pity, less victim, less kind of dramatic, less depressed. There's no question, because you've got this stability. You've got this stability in your mind. But we got to apply it every second. Not just occasionally think about it. Not just think about it when bad things happen. Because this is the one too. We can spend about the next 6 weeks talking about this. We only think about the bad things. And this really shows the depth of our delusions. This is what we really have to learn to understand now: attachment and aversion. Attachment and aversion, these simple, cute words. These are at the depth of our being, at the level of unbelievable assumptions. So the assumption of attachment, which is rooted in ego grasping, the misconception of a separate self. The assumption of attachment, and it is at the level of attachment. It's multifaceted. But the assumption of attachment is this schizophrenic, and Lama Yeshe would often say that, and don't be insulted by that. This sense of being nobody. I'm this sense of bereft, cut off, nobody. Attachment is a symptom of a person who thinks they're nobody, who's utterly dissatisfied and empty and bereft. So the attachment, the first level of it is this emotional, is this powerful sense of never having enough. I've never got enough. I've never accomplished enough. No matter what I do, it's not enough. No matter what I accomplish, it's not enough. How much I practice is not enough. How much I have is not enough. It's a default assumption of never enough. Then that brings naturally enormous emotional hunger. That then, because I don't have enough, I have to look for something. So where do we look, for God's sake? At the objects of the five senses. Where else? It's the most evident thing. We pay attention to the five objects of the five senses. So we hunger for those, believing utterly and completely. Attachment is believing utterly and completely. When I get that, it'll fill up the gaping hole and at least alleviate the pain of dissatisfaction, at least bring me some satisfaction. Complete misconception, Buddha says. Complete misconception. So understanding the suffering of change demands we understand this technology of karma, and we understand the way attachment functions. It's dissatisfaction, which brings hunger. So we then hunger after the external things. And 99% of our life, we're trying to fulfill attachment's craving to get some moment of satisfaction. That's why we eat. That's why we sleep. That's why we shift our body. That's why we go for a walk. That's why we change our jobs. That's why we stand up. That's why we walk down, sit down, because we're trying to find satisfaction, because we're never satisfied. So we convince if I, sit down for a while, I'll feel better. Then I get bored by sitting down, so I have to stand up. Then I have to bored, I can sit down. Then I sleep. Then I have to wake up. It's all driven by attachment. It's programmed from eons of lifetimes, just driven by this instinctive attachment. We never question, we never even notice it. We just think, we call it normal. Attachment then is this, this expectation, this hunger. Then you look for something, it manipulates to get something, and when it gets it, it completely exaggerates its deliciousness, and that's its key function. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake, the deliciousness of the sleep, the deliciousness of whatever it is we think will make us satisfied, and then we expect it to stay. We try to make it permanent, and that's the tragedy, because then the point is with attachment, it over-exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. It causes to believe totally that it's going to bring me happiness. So we have this massive anticipation, this massive expectation and excitement, which we grotesquely exaggerated. You put it in your mouth and it does trigger happiness. It does trigger happiness. That's why we get fooled by it. So we, of course, think the cake is the cause of happiness. So we wanted more happiness, please. We're not satisfied. So we have another piece of cake. And we're still not satisfied, and we're not noticing this. But in reality, as we start to pay attention to our mind, we're going to notice that, in fact, from the first mouthful, the satisfaction is not getting more, it's diminishing. And by the third piece, when you're still desperately trying to get that piece of that moment of happiness, all you're getting now is a full stomach, and you'd vomit if you had a fourth piece. We know this. We know this, but it's too painful to think about it, because we're so programmed in this. And this is a gross level of attachment. This is a gross level of attachment. At a subtler level, attachment is this incredible kind of sense of entitlement. It's the hubris of attachment is unbelievable. It's this deep sense of entitlement that I only deserve good things. And what happened, we prove this. When a bad thing happens, how do we respond? Attachment just got is kind of insulted when you get the wrong cake, the wrong taste, the wrong smell, the wrong feeling, the wrong weather, the wrong whatever it is. How dare that happen? I only deserve happiness. So the more we have that hubris, the more we have that entitlement, and it's completely instinctive from eons of practice, Buddha says. This assumption that I must only get the good things, that I deserve. That's the attitude of attachment. I deserve only the good things. So when a bad thing happens, how dare that happen to me? I don't deserve bad things. That's anger. So we live in attachment, this hubris of entitlement, this arrogance that we have, this absolute assumption that I only deserve the good things, and the outrage, which is either anger, annoyed, irritated, frustration, or depression. They are all symptoms of the same thing, thwarted attachment. And we live in these. And this is the source of every living being suffering in this universe. Look at the rats, the dogs, the ants, the humans, you name it. This is the source of our pain and suffering, living in these two fundamental neuroses. And our minds are programmed in them. So Buddhist practice is doing the unpacking and unraveling of these assumptions. First, you've got to control your body and speech. First, control the servants of your attachment and the servants of your anger. And that's what the first level of practice is. And that's already stupendous. And you do purification, which puts atomic bombs under those. Now you get to the next level and start to understand the technology of this happiness, the technology of this suffering, understand clearly what these things are. What is happiness? What is pleasure? What is attachment? What is anger? You've got to understand the meaning of these by studying the Buddha's teachings. Otherwise, it's just empty words, you know. And this is our lifetime of practice. So the Buddha is simply saying then that the second level of suffering is what we call happiness, which is when attachment gets what it wants. So suffering for us is when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is why the pain and the grief and the hurt and the sloss and the suffering and the despair and the anger and the hurt, that's because attachment, this assumption that I should only get good things. The stronger the assumption that I should only get good things, the stronger the assumption that I must get what I want every second, which is the philosophy of attachment, the more intensely painful you will experience when you don't get what it wants. And this is why we suffer. So practicing is lessening the attachment and lessening the anger. And guess what comes from this? Happiness. It's really hard to see it, but when we understand it logically, the technology of it is extremely subtle, but it's precise. So the suffering of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. When the suffering of change is when attachment gets what it wants, which we think of as happiness. But why he calls it the suffering of change is really evident. We know logically that description of the experience of eating the cake is exactly our experiences. Because it sounds so depressing, because we frankly don't know how else to get happy feelings. The only way we know to get happy feelings is at least the gross level, to get the cake, the comfort, the sleep, the clothing, the object. These are the gross level. That's the only method we know. We keep trying to do that, you know. But the point that Buddha is making, when we start to pay attention, the cake, relatively speaking, does trigger a pleasant feeling in the same way that eating the cake you've got allergies to will trigger a revolting feeling. This is not wrong, but Buddha's demanding us to look more deeply at those pleasant feelings. And all he's saying is they are pleasant feelings, but honey, do you not see they don't last? Now, we hear that, but because in our lives, we kind of know there isn't any pleasant feelings that have lasted, even though this is the tragedy. This is where we kind of confront, we bump into ourselves. We want the happiness to last. We desperately crave that happiness to last. That's the terrible suffering. And because we have this attachment, it's hungry, it's not satisfied. You find that person and you believe it's now. We say, now I've found happiness. Now I've found happiness. And as I always quote Nicole Kidman when she was with Tom Cruise, I loved Nicole Kidman, such a great example. We will be together until we are 80, she said. That's what attachment causes us, because attachment is the hunger to get the pleasant thing. You meet that divine person, it triggers incredible blissful feelings, and we want blissful feelings. Blissful feelings are what is happiness. We want them badly, and the way we get them is to get the object. So when you really meet the divine person, you're completely in love. That's attachment gone berserk. Don't criticize it, it's marvelous. But then because we can't bear the thought that will end, and we know from our countless lives of experience that it will, not because it's been cruel, it's just the nature of things. They change. But we can't bear the thought that happiness will go away. So what we do is we add another delusion on top of it. We make it permanent. That's why she said, we will be together until we are 80. So what happens when you're not? What happens when he left her for Penelope Cruz or whatever? I'm being sarcastic and silly. Devastated. Devastated, because your expectation of the lasting for eternity of that delicious feeling, which we desperately want, we want it to last. And then we project onto it that it will last, but it doesn't. And that's where the suffering is. That's the suffering. That's the suffering, because our expectation of it lasting is thwarted, and we discover the truth that suffering, the pleasure, if you track carefully the internal experience of the cake, the first moment of the cake meeting the tongue, when your stomach is empty, of course it's the best moment of the pleasure. It's actually downhill from there, but we can't bear to think that. We're not satisfied because attachment is unable to be satisfied. It's a bottomless pit. So you try the cake again get a second, you want another experience, please. And it is very pleasant and you're still excited, you get the third piece. But already, if you're really looking, it's going downhill until eventually what happens, and this is exactly the meaning of the suffering of change, inexorably, that moment of pleasure, by keeping meeting the cake, inexorably becomes disgusting. You'd vomit if you kept eating that cake. You'd vomit. So it becomes disgusting, and then we have to stop. So tomorrow, we forget all about how the cake made us nearly vomit. We forget about how it gave us acid reflux. We forget how it's making us fat. We forget that. And we only desperately, we're hungry again, emotionally hungry. We're desperate again, and we'll try the cake again, remembering only that moment of pleasure at the beginning of the cake. We forget all about the fat, the ugly, the acidic, the rest. And then we try again, and we try again, and we try again, and we try again. And Buddha says we've been doing this for eons, and we still are bashing our heads against brick walls. So the question has to be then, what the hell's Buddha telling us? Is he trying to make us depressed? Is he trying to make us angry? I mean, he's telling us what happiness isn't. Well, what the hell is his view? Well, unfortunately, the way they lay it all out, it takes time to get the understanding. But very simply, basically what Buddha's saying, hey, babies, I have found how to stop suffering. And I have found, and this is his point, and you only really learn about this when you learn it in the literature about the mind. It comes later. They take you very incrementally. That he's saying, I have found methods of how to trigger pleasant feelings in the mind, because that's where they exist, that won't change into suffering feelings. And he says, that's the nature of your mind. So the method he has got, this is it, this is the essence of Buddhism. He says, we think that happy feelings are what we get when we get the cake or the boy or whatever. And we do get happy feelings. But the Buddha says, because the method is so gross, depending upon your senses, depending upon attachment, that pleasure is still pleasure, but it's contaminated, it's polluted, it's and it's short-lived. So, so he says, but I found a method. So for us, as far as we're concerned, happy feelings are what we get when we get the object of attachment. Buddha says, no, baby. Happy feelings are what you get when you give up attachment. That's when you start to taste the true nature of your own blissful mind. This is Buddha's view. It's outrageous. It's joyful. Your own mind is in the nature of bliss when it's unencumbered by the junk. When you depollute your mind, when you get rid of attachment and anger and the rest, what you're left with is virtue and happiness. That's it. That's it. That's very simple. That's the Buddha's path. It just takes time, that's all. And it's free. Time for a break. 5 minutes of questions. No questions. Just have a break.